Thank you, Don. I was afraid he would lay it on a little thick, but there's payback possibilities for me on Thursday morning. So if I wasn't happy with the introduction, I can just do the same thing to him, but I'll think about it. I think all of us who are speaking here feel a little bit like the actor in a play who is not only part of the story on the stage, but who also occasionally turns aside and speaks to the audience. You know, the character, he's in the story, but he's also talking to the audience. And I want to preach Christ from the Old Testament to you, and I also want to teach you something about how to preach Christ from the Old Testament. So I feel like I need to both preach to you, at the same time do asides, and say, now, by the way, when you do that, do this. And that's a challenge, but it's also a great deal of fun. Let me read to you the account of the you might say, the climax of the Exodus, or the epitome of the Exodus, which is the crossing of the Red Sea. Exodus 14, I'm going to start verse 5, go to the end. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites, who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi Hahiroth, opposite Baal Zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the salvation the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the waters, so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord, when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." Then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to the one side and light to the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of the fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He made the wheels of their chariots come off, so that they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them back into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the great power the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. That's God's word. It's hard to overstate the importance of the Red Sea crossing for the rest of the Bible. Alec Matier, the Old Testament scholar, says there's at least 24 other direct references to the Red Sea crossing in the rest of the Old Testament, and there's just probably innumerable allusions to it. In the New Testament, significant statements like this. Matthew, of course, says about Jesus, "Out of Egypt I've called my son," quoting Hosea 11, which was a reference to the Exodus. That's the son in Hosea's saying was Israel. And therefore, Matthew is making a very direct connection between Jesus' work and the Old Testament Exodus and the Red Sea crossing. When you go to Luke chapter 9, the Transfiguration. In Luke's version, we have Jesus talking with Moses and Elijah, who appear and speak to him. But as many of you know, you read the English text and it'll say that Moses and Elijah were talking to Jesus about his departure, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. And it looks like it's talking about his death, which of course it was, except that the Greek word there is the word Exodus. A rather big hint that Luke is saying that what Jesus was going to accomplish in Jerusalem was the ultimate getting out, the ultimate Exodus. And then you go to Hebrews, and of course Hebrews 3 and 4 says that Jesus is the greater Moses, that Moses points to Jesus. And then in Hebrews 11, verse 29, it says that by faith the Israelites passed through the sea on dry land, but the Egyptians couldn't do it because they didn't have faith. And it's very clear, Hebrews 11 is talking about Christian faith, and it's using the Red Sea crossing as a paradigm for Christian faith. And probably the most significant of all the references is 1 Corinthians 10, where Paul makes that enigmatic statement that says that when the Israelites passed through the cloud and the sea, they were baptized into Moses. And then just a few verses later, it talks about that and several other incidents. In verse 6, Paul says, "These things were written as examples for us Christians." If there's one Old Testament passage that the New Testament invites us to read Christocentrically, invites us to see it as a paradigm of Christ's salvation, it's this one.